Welcome to the Classic and Current Gaming Podcast, a weekly podcast where we look at the history and development of video games. I'm your host, RxDude22. In Season 4, which we are knee-deep in now, we're looking at games that I personally enjoy, that I really think you should try out, but they may be games that you're not very familiar with. This week's game originally came out on the NES and several other consoles, and Nintendo refused to license it, but it's a fantastic game. I don't understand why they didn't license it, but we'll have more details in the podcast here. But this week's game, we're going to look at Micro Machines. Micro Machines is a racing game developed by Codemasters and originally published by Comerica for the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1991. Themed around Galoob's Micro Machine toys, players race in miniaturized toy vehicles around various environments. The game is the first installment in the Micro Machines video game series. Micro Machines was developed because Galoob wanted Codemasters to develop a game based on their toy brand, although Galoob and Codemasters encountered legal issues with Nintendo over the game being unlicensed. Micro Machines was ported to several systems and received reboots for the Xbox, PlayStation 2, and GameCube in 2002. A sequel, Micro Machines 2 Turbo Tournament, was released in 1994, and the series was revived in 2016 with the release of a title for iOS and Android. Micro Machines received critical acclaim, with reviewers praising the originality and two-player mode, although some criticized the sprites on some versions. Retrospectively, it has been considered one of the greatest video games of all time. Gameplay. Micro Machines is a top-down racing game. Players observe races from above. Players race in environments such as breakfast and pool tables, work desks and tree houses, driving toy vehicles such as powerboats, helicopters, Formula One cars, and tanks that can shoot other racers. Courses have a predefined path that racers must follow. If a player leaves the defined route for too long, they are sent back to the track. Many have obstacles such as cereal boxes on breakfast tables and pencil sharpeners on desks. There are two game modes, the Micro Machines Challenge and Head-to-Head. In both modes, players select a character. In Micro Machines Challenge, players race against 3 computer-controlled opponents and must finish in first or second to qualify for the next round. Players are given 3 chances. If all 3 are lost, the game is over. Every 3 races, players compete in a time trial race to earn an extra chance. In head-to-head, players race against each other against another vehicle. Players are color-coded, and the goal is to get lights on the screen to show the player's color by getting a screen ahead of the other player, so the trailing player is no longer visible. When this happens, one light turns to the color of the leading player. The game ends when all 8 lights are one color, or after 3 laps, in which case victory goes to the player with the most lights. If the game is tied, there is a sudden death playoff, where the next player to win a light wins. The game starts with 4 lights of each color. Head-to-head can be played in either single-player mode or with 2 players. With 2 players, certain characters have a handicap to give the other players a better chance. The Game Gear version supports 2 players via link-up, or by players holding one end of the console, each with one player using the buttons and the other the D-pad. Development. In 1990, the founders of Codemasters, David and Richard Darling, were at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas and were impressed with the popularity of the Nintendo Entertainment System in the US. They wanted to develop games for the system, but did not have a license from Nintendo. In October 1989, programmer Andrew Graham developed a prototype, California Buggy Boys, a racing game with a top-down view on a scrolling dune-based racetrack. Its 2-player mode, based on the 1983 Adventure International game Rally Speedway, does not employ split screen, a technique that is hard to achieve on NES hardware. Instead, 2-player races on a single screen. Hugging the screen edges at the distance between them grows. Once the distance is large enough, the winning player gains a point, a difference from Rally Speedway, in which the losing player gains a time penalty instead. The prototype was showcased with multiple consoles networked. It featured buggies similar to those in Power Drift, targeting the United States market. Codemasters then obtained a license deal with Galoob, winning a game based on its Micro Machine toys. California Buggy Boys was used as a base, and Galoob sent a good selection of toys to Codemasters. The development team did not have access to official Nintendo documents, and their knowledge of the NES's hardware came from reverse engineering. They chose recognizable houseware environments such as tables, although the NES's limited graphic capabilities necessitated repetition. Artist Paul Perot converted the California Buggy Boys graphics using deluxe paint and a cross compler. According to Graham, the team tried to keep the tracks short as they were considered more enjoyable. Graham stated that the artificial intelligence is basic by modern standards and that it was difficult to replicate the multiplayer experience in single-player mode. The AI consisted of invisible arrows, which directed computer-controlled vehicles. Graham stated that split screen was not viable on the NES, and that the single-screen system was something that he was eager to try. He further stated that he was very happy with the multiplayer mode, saying it is the best part of the game and made the single-player mode boring in comparison. He was very pleased when Richard Darling stated that Micro Machines is the best game they had ever made. Another multiplayer mode was shown at the Consumer Electronics Show, but was discontinued due to requiring a network. Micro Machines was completed in September of 1990. It was not submitted to quality assurance, so a major bug that caused the game to crash was discovered near completion. The bug occurred when a player tried to reverse on the first race, but none of the testers thought to do so as they thought it was so easy. It was determined that just one binary bit was wrong, but many buggy ROM chips had already been manufactured, so a device akin to a miniature Game Genie was installed in the cartridge to correct it. Micro Machines was released for the NES by Camerica in 1991. Nintendo wanted development halted because Codemasters did not have a license from them, and sued Galoob over the sales of the game Genie. Courts ruled in Galoob's favor, Nintendo appealed, and the ruling was upheld. The legal issues meant that sales of the NES version were not as good as hoped. After the release of the NES version, ports for the Mega Drive, Game Gear, Master System, Game Boy, Super Nintendo Entertainment System, CDI, and IBM PC compatibles were developed. The Mega Drive team changed the handling, giving it an on-rails feel, and most of the graphics were merely required redrawing. This involved adding color, or simply recreating them based on the originals. Rotations were added to the vehicle sprites for smoother movement. According to artist Brian Hartley, the main considerations were the color schemes, and it was decided to keep the game with a cartoon style. He stated it led to a fun use of color. The design decisions were made during the development for the NES version, so the Mega Drive team simply had to convert the game for Mega Drive hardware. Galoob's only input was to ensure correctness of their logos. The Mega Drive version was originally due for release in January 1993, but Sega's legal issues over the game's lack of license delayed release until July. The CDI version was coded by Ashley Hogg. He stated that there were problems that only occurred on this console, and CDRs were expensive. The Game Gear team were originally against the on-rails handling of the Mega Drive version, and wanted to revert to the NES drifting. The Game Gear version was created by Ashley Rutledge and Dave Saunders, who adjusted the Mega Drive graphics to the Game Gear's smaller screen. It was produced alongside the Mega Drive version and programmed from scratch to run at 60 frames per second. The main problem was retaining detail on the Game Gear's inferior storage and memory capabilities. Much of the art had to be redrawn with fewer colors at lower resolutions. The biggest problem was the screen size, which made it difficult to take corners at high speeds. The team tweaked the camera movement so the vehicle was positioned further back, so players are able to see the track ahead according to vehicle speed. The option screens were simplified to quickly initiate the gameplay. Graham was at the center of development across platforms and had no problem with the Game Gear version having vehicular behavior similar to the NES version. Rutledge and Saunders came up with the method of multiplayer on the same device. Multiplayer via link-up was difficult to implement, with problems such as the game losing sync. The Game Gear version was released in 1993, the Master System, CDI, SNES, and MS-DOS versions in 1994, and the Game Boy version in 1995. The Amiga version was released in September of 1993. Micro Machines was followed by a sequel, Micro Machines 2 Turbo Tournament in 1994, and a reboot titled Micro Machines and released by Infogrames in 2002 for PlayStation 2, Xbox, and Game Boy Advance. A GameCube version was released in January 2003, although this version and the Xbox version were canceled in the US. The series received an updated game, also titled Micro Machines for iOS and Android, in 2016. Micro Machines was bundled with a sequel and released on the Game Boy Color in 2000. Reception. Micro Machines received critical acclaim. The multiplayer mode in particular was well received, and some reviewers complimented the graphics and addictiveness. Reviewing the Mega Drive version, computer and video games Steve Keen lauded the vehicle movement and sound effects, and Paul Rand praised the multiplayer mode. Both described Micro Machines as one of the best racing games on the Mega Drive. In 1994, Micro Machines was listed as their best Mega Drive driving game. The reviewer from Mega Magazine utilized the playability, but criticized the lack of a save function. Nevertheless, he thought the game was destined to become a classic. In a later review, the game was described as utterly wonderful, and the addictiveness of the head-to-head mode was praised. The game was listed at number 8 of their top 100 list. Game Master's Jim Douglas lauded the graphics, brilliant controls, and the two-player mode, and James Leach described the Mega Drive version as even better than the NES version, and utilized the addictiveness. A reviewer from Mean Machines, Sega, agreed with Game Master by complimenting the addictiveness of a two-player mode, but believed the single-player mode is too easy. Sega Force's reviewer praised the visuals and colorful graphics and the two-player mode, but described the sounds as average. The game was described as having an undeniable charm by a reviewer from French magazine Supersonic. The Game Gear and Master System versions were noted for the ability to link two units together and the graphics respectively. Reviewing the Game Gear version, Micro Machines Sega reviewer believed this method of two players on one console was revolutionary, but criticized the sprite flicker. Nevertheless, the game was described as probably the most playable game around. A reviewer from GamePro described the graphics as colorful, but criticized the difficulty of distinguishing vehicles despite the color coding. The sounds were described as standard for the Game Gear, but the two-player via console sharing was lauded, but also described as clumsy. Computer and video games Dinez Ahmet had a similar opinion to GamePro's reviewer by describing the graphics as well-designed, and also had an opinion similar to that of Mean Machine Sega with regards to the two-player sharing function. The conversion was described as extremely accurate. Sega Master Force's reviewer liked the originality and addictiveness and described the Game Gear version as fantastic. The Master System version was complimented by Mean Machine Sega for its two-player mode, describing it as timeless, great fun, and an absolute essential purchase, but with flat graphics. French magazine Player One utilized the Master System version's two-player mode and echoed Mean Machine Sega opinion by describing the game as a must. And in their Game Gear review, a similar compliment was made, calling it original and well done. The Game Gear and Master System versions were reviewed together by a reviewer from German magazine Megafun, who complimented their humor. The animation of the Game Gear version was described by Joypad as breathtaking, and that of the Master System version was described as excellent. Their sprites were criticized, saying the Master System version deletes sprites when there is an excess of vehicles on screen, and the Game Gear version sprites suffer slowdowns and blinks. Critics had mixed opinions on the Amiga's version graphics and sound. Amiga Joker and French magazine Amiga Dreams reviewers liked them, but CU Amigas criticized the graphics as poorly detailed and the sound as simple. The One's reviewer lauded the two-player mode, described as the best two-player racing game we've ever seen. Stuart Campbell of Amiga Powers praised the location and control, although he criticized the limited single-player mode and lack of parallax scrolling. Paul Rundell of Amiga Action praised the originality, but criticized the head-to-head mode, saying it breaks the excitement. A reviewer from Amiga Computing believed the tracks were entertaining and liked that they were made up of silly things. The vehicle's racing and environments were described by Steve Bradley of Amiga Format as absolutely bloody brilliant, and he also praised the addictiveness. Other versions were also well received. Reviewing the NES version, MegaFun praised the scrolling and controls. Skylar Miller of Allgame believed Micro Machines graphics pushed the console's capabilities and also liked the colorful scenery. GamePro's reviewer stated that the racing scenario variety and the vehicles being based on Galoob's Micro Machine toys made the game original. Mean Machines reviewer liked the presentation and playability, but described the sprites as inconsistent. In a review of the SNES version, GamePro lauded the cartoony graphics and cheerful sound effects, along with the lack of car customization to keep the gameplay basic. Coming Soon Magazine's reviewer criticized the PC version's simple graphics, but thought highly of its addictiveness and well-produced animation. Accolades. In 1995, Total rated Micro Machines 5th in their top 100 SNES games. They praised the game, calling it a unique designed experience, and they praised the top-down view, control system, and the opponent's AI that it works perfectly. In 1996, Next Generation ranked Micro Machines as number 18 on their top 100 games of all time, citing the heart-pounding, adrenaline-pumping action, split-second accurate controls, and perfect balance. Micro Machines was listed by The Guardian in June 2014 as one of the 30 best British video games. The NES version is 31 in IGN's top 100 NES games, the highest ranked unlicensed game. All information in the podcast today was provided by Wikipedia. And that'll bring a close to episode 68 of the Classic and Current Gaming Podcast. We have several different ways to keep up with the podcast. If you like watching video gameplay while listening to the podcast, check out our YouTube channel, and we'll have that presentation for you there each and every week. If you're on the go and you want to listen, we've got you covered that way as well. You can find us on Spotify or your other favorite listening channel. We'll be back next week with another great game. It's been RxDude22 from the Classic and Current Gaming Podcast signing out. Keep on gaming. See you on the next stream. Be good to each other. And you'll hear and see me on the podcast again next week. Have a great week, everybody. Thank you for listening and watching. And we'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.